Good morning. Welcome to this pre-recorded message, which is the sermon for tomorrow. The text we're looking at is the temptation of Jesus, and it's from Luke 4, 1 through 13. Um, Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone who I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered him and said, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. So, when our son Daniel was, I think he was about 9 or 10 years old, he joined a Cub Scout troop. And I was very pleased at the time to learn that Larry Birchall was his scout leader. Larry had been my regimental sergeant major when I joined the regiment as a young man after returning home from college. And Larry was the first Black Bermudan to serve as RSM, regimental sergeant major, and I really admired him. Well, one of the activities that Larry organized each year was a weekend camp for the boys and their fathers on Long Island, which was a small deserted island in the Great Sound in Bermuda. In 1901 and 1902, it had been used to incarcerate Afrikaner prisoners during the Second Boer War. And a number of them who had died during that period were buried on Long Island. The island had few resources, so we had to bring over all of our supplies, including water, with us on the boat. When we arrived, the boys and their fathers worked together to set up our tents and store the food while Larry got the campfire going. Now, the whole idea of the camp was to create a safe environment for the boys while also providing activities which were designed to challenge them and develop their self confidence. And I remember one of the activities involved climbing a tall casuarina tree, at the top of which Larry had fastened a paper plate with an attached pencil. And the challenge was to climb the tree and write your name on the paper plate to demonstrate that you had completed the task. Another activity was called the Flying Fox. And Larry had set up a rope and a pulley system with a wooden seat attached to a zip line from the top of a cliff on Long Island over the water out to a rocky outcrop. And the boys were invited to zoom down the zip line and then jump into the water when they were sort of halfway down. Another thing we all did together was to make our way in the middle of the night out to the old Boer graveyard. It was an expedition to find the great headless chicken, which was apparently nearly as big as me, and it haunted the island, especially when there were children around. Well, by the time we reached the Boer cemetery, you could just see the excitement and the fear in the boy's eyes. And then Larry apparently spotted the headless chicken. He saw it, at which point we could hear its unearthly screams and screeches, and then we all turned and ran as fast as we could back to the safety of the camp. And we gathered around the campfire where we roasted marshmallows while the boys excitedly shared their experience and the adventures that they'd had that evening. I remember that night sitting by the fire afterwards and talking to Larry. And I'd been reading The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, where he describes how many of the indigenous cultures, particularly in Africa, send boys who are coming of age into the wilderness with tribal leaders and elders. And this is to in order to challenge them and to help form their identities as responsible members of the community. And I shared my thoughts on this with Larry, and I asked him, Larry, do you think maybe that's what we're doing here with the boys? And he replied, I never looked at it that way before, but yes, I guess that's essentially what this is all about, building relationships and helping these youngsters form their identities as members of a wider community. Well, that conversation made me think more about the connection between identity and behavior. Have you ever noticed when someone acts in an outrageous or rude manner, the first reaction people have is to ask, "Who the hell do you think you are?" It's like an automatic response, but it points to a deeper truth. That is, who we believe ourselves to be shapes how we think we are entitled or obliged to behave. In our text this morning, Satan understands that principle, which is why he challenges Jesus' identity in the wilderness. And the three key words in this passage, if you are, if you are the Son of God, and those words echo the affirmation that Jesus just received at his baptism, where it was said to him by God, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." So Jesus hears his identity spoken over him at the Jordan, but immediately afterwards, with his hair still wet from his baptism, he is driven into the wilderness to wrestle with that identity and what that identity really means. The temptations before him are not just about hunger and power, they're about identity, about whether he will claim a false self, which is rooted in popularity, in power, or presumption. When Satan, for example, offers Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, the temptation is to rule by domination rather than by love, to seize authority rather than to serve humbly, to fulfill God's purposes through coercion rather than through the way of the cross. And when Satan urges Jesus to throw himself from the pinnacle of the temple, well, that's the temptation of presumption, an arrogant confidence that disregards humility, responsibility, and respect for others. And we often think that the temptation to turn stones into bread is just about Jesus satisfying his hunger. However, Satan is actually trying to also persuade Jesus to adopt an identity modeled after the Roman emperors, who secured their popularity by providing free food, free bread, and free entertainment, winning favor through bread and through gladiatorial games. And that temptation is not really so. This temptation is not only about Jesus' physical hunger, rather, it is Satan's attempt to twist Jesus' deep desire to feed others into a means of self-serving power and control, which of course he fails in tempting him to do that. I shouldn't really use the words tempt, actually, and temptation. The NRSV translation more correctly describes the word as the testing of Jesus, the testing of Jesus. And frequently, we tend to associate this period of Lent with temptation. So we think, that Lent is really about giving up things that we enjoy, such as chocolate, coffee, alcohol, TV, social media, and the like. But Lent is much more about rediscovering our identity and the testing of that identity. It's about asking ourselves that question: who do we think we are? There are plenty of things in the world today that are testing our identity right now. It feels like Lent, particularly this year, as well as being a season of the Christian year, which we do every year and it leads to Easter. It's also, in a real sense, a testing of whom we claim to be as followers of Jesus. I was saying before I gave the benediction at the official board meeting on Tuesday that these days, when I'm watching the news on television, it stirs up sometimes such anger in me. It gets to the point where I want to take something and throw it at the TV. And those feelings of anger, or it may also be fear, which are stirred up in us by the actions in the larger world, can impact how we act in the immediate world of our community. And because of that influence, we tend to forget who we are. We might find that the tensions in the wider world start to affect our personal relationships with our family and our community. And if we find that happening in our lives, it's good to ask the question, what's really going on here? Are there some larger underlying forces that are affecting how we are reacting to events in our immediate setting? So we could ask the question, how do we recover our true identity in the midst of this wilderness of chaos and injustice that we are experiencing? A world that sometimes feels like it's sapping our energy and impacting our community. Well, in the book Swan's Way, Marcel Proust offers an unexpected answer. He recalls returning home late on a dull winter evening, and he was burdened by fatigue and a bleak sense of what tomorrow might hold. His maid, noticing his weariness, offered him tea and cake. Initially refusing, he finally gave in at her insistence. And as he sipped and ate, an unexplainable joy washed over him. His troubles vanished, or they felt like they'd vanished, and he no longer felt mediocre, accidental, and mortal. And puzzled by this sensation, he started searching for its cause. And the answer he finally realized lay not in the food that was given to him, but within himself. The taste of the tea and the cake, you see, triggered a flood of memories, transporting him back to childhood visits with his aunt in Cambrai, where she had served him the same treat. Suddenly, long forgotten scenes surfaced: the little town, the village church, the old house, distant relatives, and garden flowers. And at that moment, the tea and the cake had not just nourished him, they had revived his memory and the mystery of a past existence which reminded him of who he was and where he came from. Is it indeed possible to hand a person a cup of tea and say to that person, now drink this and remember who you are? Well, it's not only possible, but in a real sense, this is what we do when we come here and when we join in the sacramental acts of being together in community and worshiping together. When we were at the Ash Wednesday service this week, I used these words just before we marked ourselves with the ashes. I said these were once trees and shrubs and places where life was lived to its fullest. Once they were full of life, but now they are black and gray, dry and lifeless. But mixed with the waters of our baptism, they make good fertilizer. They will help the seeds of the gospel take deeper root in us and bring forth the fruits, the harvest of justice, of peace, and of generosity. Like Jesus, our identity is established at our baptism, and this period of the Christian season of Lent, along with this, how do you describe it, chaotic time that our country and the world is going through right now, it's also a call to rediscover. It's a call to claim. It's a call to celebrate our baptismal identity. So even when, even when the headless chicken of fear and chaos looms in the wilderness, trying to make us forget who we are, the waters of our baptism remind us that we belong to God, beloved, called, and equipped to live with courage, to live with justice, and to live with hope. So this Lent, let us commit each day to reaffirming our identity as God's beloved, whether it's reaching out to someone in need, whether it's practicing gratitude, or engaging in prayer, or working for justice in our community. Let our actions reflect the courage, the love, and the hope that we are called to embody. Thanks be to God. Amen. And have a great day, and see you next time.